Didn't think we'd have this kind of a busy news day, but lo and behold, just days before training camp begins for real, on the day that the rookies report to Ashburn, the Commanders have made news as Jason Wright is out as team president. He moves on to a senior advisor role through, at the latest, the end of the year. I would imagine he is going to work on some more stadium stuff as they try to get the RFK bill out of the Senate. And we will, of course, cover that and everything that it means on the show today, tomorrow, and through the next week or so, as this is still going to be a top story as we fully understand what Wright is going to do moving forward. And, of course, where the Commanders go, where they now need to hire a new team president. So what goes into that search, what goes into that role, we will discuss it with a panel of experts over the next couple of days. And it's going to be an interesting thing to watch. We did this, obviously, with the GM search. We did this with the coaching search. Finding new people to work under Josh Harris is one thing that has been consistent, and it's something that we expected. It's been almost a year to the day. It was the 20th last year, so we're 2 days shy of the 1 year anniversary of him taking over the team, and we always knew that this was going to be a possibility. But that leaves us with a look back now. Today, the most immediate thing I think we do is essentially write the Jason Wright obituary in terms of his presidency at the helm of the Commanders. And loosen up my fingers, get to type it. Oh, wait, I already did. Hey, look, a Jason Wright presidency obituary. Jason Wright is a smart person who took a dumb job and then did a mediocre job with it. While a lot of people, including the two hosts who preceded me on this station today, think that Wright was either some DEI hire who was terrible, did a horrible job, deserves no credit for anything, and has no morals, or was the right guy at the right time who did as good of a job as anyone possibly could have and saved the franchise from Dan Snyder, the reality is that neither of those polar opposite takes are true. The truth is somewhere in the middle, and thus Wright's legacy, in a word, is complicated. I've talked with Jason a number of times over the last few years. I've always found him thoughtful, even when we didn't agree or when I thought his thoughts were missing something. I think he did a lot of smart and even some innovative things. I thought he did a few unforgivably stupid things. I have told all of this professionally to his face. He was always professional in return, and I genuinely hope he writes a book one day because some of the things that he's seen are truly and wildly unbelievable, and I'm sure there are plenty of completely and absurd stories that I don't even remotely know about. If I'm writing the Jason Wright Commanders presidency obituary, though, it has to start with the fact that Wright will forever be tied to Dan Snyder, and that colors every single accomplishment and every single failure that he has. He ultimately signed up for that job, something Wright thought he did, understanding what he was doing, working for Dan, and truly, honestly, had no idea what he was signing up for. Because there's hearing bad things. There's seeing things are bad. You remember Wright signed up after the Washington Post story in July of 2020. He signed on in August of that year. And then there's experiencing the bad things and understanding the depth of them on a guttural, visceral, everyday level. And I think it is ultimately fair to criticize Jason for not understanding that up front, that all that smoke was coming from something that was an absolute kerosene fire. It wasn't just like, I know it's kind of bad, but like, I can handle it. Like, if you didn't know what you were signing up for, that's open for criticism for me. I mean, how many stories of ineptitude, abuse, and corruption need to come out for you to be more than weary and or be more ready for what it means to go take that position? It's a blind spot that I've questioned for years, and I think one that Wright himself has questioned at times as well. But he ultimately stuck with it because he thought that he could be a part of the solution, which meant at times doing things that he probably didn't agree with so that he didn't get fired. So as the embarrassing stories, indefensible decisions, and slaps in the face of the fan base stacked up, Wright went along with them. He was playing the long game, not knowing what the end game would exactly be, but knowing he could make things as good as possible through his own lens in the meantime. And I don't say that demeaningly. Like some of the things, as I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, that Jason was trying to do and in some cases accomplishing doing were worth fighting for. But he was doing that through all of the other stuff that was just unbelievably bad. He would do the things that he thought would help turn the franchise as much as he could, mitigate the Snyder's damage, and hold them off as much as possible, hoping somewhere deep down inside that they'd ultimately sell the team. But that is the nicest version of it. The harsher version is he was a political operative playing the game, even if some of his desired outcomes were things that are good. A better workplace, more profitability, a better standing in the community, all achieved by sacrificing personal morals while working for a man who was morally reprehensible and professionally inept. All of that is why it is so hard to separate Wright from Snyder when we talk about Jason's legacy. It's easier to say either everything good was Jason, everything bad was Dan, and that's a simple and easy narrative, or just everything's on Jason. He's the president, because that's also an easy, clean narrative. But neither is true. That's not how management works, even amongst good, competent people. Nevertheless, when Dan Snyder's involved. Ultimately, the most definitive thing that we can say was Wright either didn't or wasn't capable enough of stopping everything Snyder did. And I want to say, and I almost say here, that he wasn't able to stop the worst of what Dan and Tanya and whoever else was in that very small circle wanted to do. But the reality is we actually don't know what Jason stopped Dan from doing. So maybe he did stop the worst of it. But certainly some got through the cracks. Certainly some got through the filter. Because we're now stuck with a name that floats between universally panned and thoroughly hated.
We are the Commanders.
And do I think Jason and his team probably provided mounds of data to the Snyders with better options? Polling data, popularity amongst fans, focus groups, all the types of things that someone who worked at McKinsey would provide? Yeah, I do. Did they ultimately convince Snyder or find another way to leak it to the press and get crushed with enough time to change it before the official announcement? No, they didn't. So you get to do with that what you wish. You can either say, hey, he tried, or didn't do enough, and either one is true, and thus both are fair. It's going to be an opinion and the beholder of said opinion. Did Wright put his name on everything related to the multiple Sean Taylor botches? Yeah, he did. Do I think those were his ideas or one he was forced to execute to keep his job? The latter. But he still did it. Untying Snyder and Wright in that situation is impossible. For much of the last year, Jason's been working on the stadium sites. I think he set the team up really well in all three municipalities, Virginia, Maryland, D.C. But ultimately, we're still stuck waiting on RFK. So there's more work to do in D.C. And I do think that is probably one of the boxes that Jason Wright would like to check before he leaves completely in his senior advisor role. But is it Wright's fault or some random senator from North Dakota with a hobby horse who decided he wanted to score cheap political points at the district's expense that that's still the case? I'd say the latter, but ultimately you can decide how much credit or blame goes there, and we all know that if Snyder hadn't been the owner, the RFK site would have been unlocked years ago. And so ultimately that's where we stand with Jason Wright. Jason Wright was someone who worked for Dan Snyder. He should not be reduced to that. Jason's smart. He worked on major projects at McKinsey, specifically in crisis management, and in that way, he was 1,000% qualified for the role here. He is, and forever will be, the first black president in NFL history. That is a historic achievement and something that is absolutely applaudable and should be celebrated for breaking down that barrier. He hired an incredibly diverse staff that brought a lot of voices into a lot of important meetings that helped lead to positive change and helped ultimately set the stage to revitalize the franchise to the extent that it's been revitalized so far under the Harris administration. And while the biggest factor in the meteoric rises in attendance, revenue, corporate sales, and all of those factors was inarguably Dan Snyder leaving, Jason and his team do deserve tremendous credit for laying the groundwork and ultimately executing on the plans once the sale went through. All of that is real. All of that is good. All of that is worth noting. But it will all fall behind from a legacy standing to the lasting negativity of some of the end of the Snyder era. The rebrand, the Taylor tributes gone wrong, the Twitter admonishment of a reporter, something that had nothing to do with Snyder and was completely Wright's fault 100% on his own. So when we talk about legacy, when we write the obituary, there's something for everyone. Critics, fans, haters, defenders. Wright's legacy is complicated. He was the last team president under Dan Snyder. And from a legacy standpoint, there's only so much the first part of that sentence, the last, can do for the end under Dan Snyder.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.